Okay, let's unpack this. We all have dreams, don't we? Those whispers of what could be, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet. But here's the fascinating question. Why is it that some people consistently move towards those aspirations, putting in the works, taking the leaps, while others feel, well, perpetually stuck watching from the shore?
Yeah, it's one of the most complex puzzles of human behavior, really. It's almost never a simple case of just, wanting it enough.
Yeah,
It's about a whole ecosystem of factors working together, or sometimes against each other.
exactly. And that's our mission today. We've got this incredible stack of source material shared by you, our listener, a really deep, layered look at the psychological, the emotional, social, personal, and behavioral forces that kind of create this difference.
Think of it like looking under the hood of aspiration itself. What are all the components, and maybe more importantly, how do they interact?
Our goal is to dive into these sources and pull out the most vital insights, core nuggets about beliefs, feelings, circumstances, and actions that help explain the why behind someone's journey towards their dreams. It's definitely not one single answer. It's a pretty complex system.
And what's really compelling, I think, is seeing how interconnected everything is. You really can't just isolate one factor and say, that's it.
Absolutely. So let's jump in. The sources seem to lay the groundwork by starting right at the core of the individual. What's going on inside your head?
That's right. Yeah, the initial sections really emphasize the power of personal beliefs and mindset. A foundational idea the sources keep coming back to is self-efficacy.
Self-efficacy. Okay.
Basically, it's your belief in your own capability to execute specific tasks or achieve particular goals.
Okay, so it's like highly specific confidence, not just a vague I'm confident, but I'm confident I can learn how to do this specific thing.
Precisely. The sources use the example of a student, right? One with high self-efficacy about, say, understanding calculus will approach it very differently than one with low self-efficacy.
How so?
Well, the first one believes their effort, their studying, will actually lead to mastery. The second one might just disengage because they fundamentally don't believe they can master it, no matter how much effort they put in.
So the belief directly impacts the behavior whether you even bother trying.
Exactly. And this connects really strongly to the concept of growth versus fixed mindset, which the sources discuss quite a bit, drawing on Carol Dweck's work.
Ah, yes, the growth mindset, believing you can develop abilities.
Right. A growth mindset sees abilities as trainable through dedication and hard work. It makes embracing challenges feel, well, almost exciting. Failures are just temporary setbacks, chances to learn something.
Whereas a fixed mindset is more like you believe abilities are innate, set in stone.
Yes, exactly. If you have a fixed mindset about, say, creativity, you might think, look, either I'm a creative person or I'm not. So if you hit a snag or get some criticism, a fixed mindset can interpret that as proof you just don't have the talent, and that often leads to giving up.
Right.
The sources use that writer example again. A growth mindset writer learns from rejection, keeps honing their craft. A fixed mindset writer might see rejection as final proof they lack talent, and, well, they often stop writing altogether.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just about your skill now, but your belief about your potential to get better.
And these mindsets are deeply, deeply intertwined with the paralyzing force of the fear of failure. If you believe your abilities are fixed and that failing proves you're inadequate, well, the fear of that outcome can become huge.
That sort of looming dread that just stops you from even taking the first step sometimes.
It really is. And this fear often fuels imposter syndrome, where even if you achieve things, you have this persistent feeling you're a fraud, just waiting to be found out.
Yeah.
The sources mention the talented artist avoiding exhibitions. That's a classic example. Their imposter syndrome and fear of failure make them think any success is just luck, and showing their work risks exposing them as not truly talented. The fear literally prevents the action.
Wow, so the internal belief I'm a fraud leads to the emotional fear of being found out, which then dictates the behavior avoiding exposure. That's a really clear interaction loop.
It's a powerful loop, definitely. Another interesting point the sources bring up is how perfectionism can sometimes function in a similar way.
How so? Isn't striving for excellence good?
Striving for excellence, yes. But perfectionism often sets an impossibly high standard, driven by a belief that anything less than absolutely perfect is total failure, and that can lead to complete inaction.
Like the entrepreneur who never launches because the business plan isn't quite perfect yet. They just get stuck refining it forever.
Precisely. The belief that it must be flawless before starting completely overrides the reality that progress often requires iteration, trial and error, and this ties back into cognitive dissonance.
Okay, cognitive dissonance. The discomfort when beliefs and actions don't align.
Exactly. If your belief, like, I'm not really talented enough, clashes with your dream, I want to be a musician, that internal conflict feels uncomfortable. The sources note that one way people resolve this dissonance is simply to abandon the dream. It makes their actions, or lack thereof, consistent with their negative belief.
Wow. So you sacrifice the actual dream just to make your internal world feel consistent? That's a
Eh,
heavy price to pay.
It really is. The sources also briefly touch on how things like an optimistic outlook versus a pessimistic one, or our tendency towards confirmation bias, seeking out info that confirms what we already believe.
Which could reinforce limiting or empowering beliefs, depending on what you focus on.
Right, and even just having a clear vision for the future, all these shape this internal landscape, influencing what you believe is possible for yourself.
So right from the start, it seems the stories we tell ourselves, these core beliefs about our own potential, are absolutely fundamental. For you listening, maybe pause and think. What are the core beliefs you hold about your abilities? How might they be interacting with fears like failure, or maybe feeling like an imposter, to shape the actions you do, or maybe don't take?
And moving on from beliefs, the sources dedicate quite a bit of space to the profound impact of emotional factors. Our feelings aren't just reactions, they are potent forces influencing our capacity to actually go after our dreams.
Right, this is where the journey gets visceral. It's
Yeah.
not purely logical or intellectual.
Not at all. A really key concept here is emotional resilience. Basically, the capacity to recover relatively quickly from difficulties, from setbacks.
Because chasing dreams inevitably involves setbacks,
Yeah.
right? Rejection, criticism, things not going to plan.
Exactly. The writer who keeps submitting manuscripts after getting multiple rejections, that's a prime example from the sources. That's resilience in action. Without that ability to sort of bounce back emotionally, each setback could feel like the absolute end of the road. And this ties directly into the crippling nature of the fear of rejection, which we touched on earlier. If the feeling of being rejected is just unbearable for you, you'll likely avoid any situation where it might happen. The aspiring actor avoiding auditions isn't just fearing failure in general. Often they're fearing that specific emotional pain of being told no.
So it's avoiding the feeling itself that prevents the behavior.
That's interesting.
Exactly. And the sources are very clear that mental health challenges like anxiety and depression aren't just minor emotional states. They can be significant barriers.
Right.
Anxiety can flood you with self-doubt and overwhelm, making taking any action feel almost impossible. And depression, well, it can drain your energy and motivation, literally leaving you without the emotional fuel needed to pursue anything, let alone a challenging dream.
That really highlights that sometimes pursuing dreams actually requires addressing underlying health issues first. You can't just push through sometimes. Crucially important point. And therefore, learning to manage and respond effectively to challenging emotions, what the sources call emotional regulation, becomes vital.
Okay.
The sources suggest that people who can acknowledge difficult feelings, fear, disappointment, frustration, without being completely consumed by them, are better equipped to stay on course. They can make clearer decisions instead of just reacting impulsively or shutting down entirely.
So it's not about not feeling things, but about navigating those feelings constructively.
Right. And then there's the question of why. Why are you pursuing this particular dream? This brings up intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
Okay, intrinsic being driven by the love of it, extrinsic by external rewards.
You got it. Are you driven by the inherent satisfaction and joy of the activity itself that's intrinsic, or are you chasing external rewards like money, fame, approval that's extrinsic?
Like the difference between the artist who genuinely loves the process of creating versus one who's maybe only chasing fame and fortune.
Yes, exactly. The sources point out that intrinsic motivation is often much more sustainable, especially when you hit roadblocks. When things get tough, that love for the process itself can keep you going, even if those external rewards are delayed or maybe never even materialize.
That makes sense. The why keeps you fueled.
And sustaining that effort often requires impulse control.
Resisting immediate pleasures for that long-term gain. The classic marshmallow test idea, kind of.
Exactly that kind of thing. The student prioritizing studying over going out is delaying immediate gratification for a future goal. If you have lower impulse control, you're probably more likely to choose immediate comfort or pleasure over the sustained, sometimes uncomfortable effort that a big dream demands. Stress management techniques are also mentioned as important supporting factors, basically. How you cope with stress impacts your emotional reserves and helps prevent those avoidance behaviors we talked about.
The sources also briefly mention things like self-compassion, being kind to yourself, especially after messing up.
Which is so key for emotional resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And emotional intelligence, sort of navigating the social and emotional landscape effectively. And even early attachment styles, suggesting how secure you felt early on might influence your confidence in taking risks later.
It really paints a picture where your entire emotional landscape, both past and present, is constantly shaping your capacity to act on your dreams.
So our feelings, our ability to manage them, maybe even our emotional history, they're all powerful drivers or brakes. For you listening, what emotions tend to surface when you seriously think about pursuing a particular dream? How do you typically handle those tougher feelings, like fear or maybe disappointment?
Okay, so expanding outwards from the individual's internal world, the sources next explore the significant influence of social and environmental factors. We don't chase dreams in a vacuum, right? The world around us plays a huge role.
Right, this is where the external forces really come into play. What society values, what resources are actually available to you, that kind of stuff.
Precisely. And cultural expectations are a major one. Societal norms subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, define what kinds of dreams are seen as valuable, or acceptable, or even possible.
Yeah.
The sources mention cultures where maybe pursuing the arts might be frowned upon, while more traditional paths like medicine or law are heavily pushed. This doesn't just impact your own internal goals, but also the kind of support systems you might find available.
Because your family and friends are usually embedded in that same cultural context, right?
Absolutely. A strong support system, getting encouragement from family, friends, maybe a community group, provides crucial emotional resilience and sometimes very practical help too. The young entrepreneur whose family genuinely believes in them and maybe lends a hand is in a vastly different position than someone facing constant skepticism or discouragement.
That external belief can really help counteract internal doubt, can't it?
It definitely can. And peer influence is incredibly potent, especially when you're younger, but even later on. If your close friends are ambitious and actively pursuing their own goals, it tends to normalize aspiration. It can provide mutual motivation.
Right.
Conversely, if your peer group is maybe more focused on immediate comfort or isn't particularly driven, it can make your own ambition feel kind of isolating or maybe even excessive.
The company you keep really does shape your perspective and probably your actions too.
For sure. Access to mentorship is another key external factor the sources highlight. Having mentors offers guidance. They share lessons learned from their own journey, and often they provide access to crucial networks and opportunities that would be really hard to find on your own.
Like having someone who's walked the path show you where the hidden pitfalls are.
Exactly. And then there's the undeniable impact of economic background. Financial stability provides a safety net, doesn't it? It allows for greater risk-taking, like quitting a stable job to start a business or going back to school full-time.
Whereas someone from a more disadvantaged background might be forced to prioritize immediate survival, basic security, over chasing a dream no matter how strong their internal drive is.
Exactly. Resources, or the lack of them, are a very real constraint for many people. And closely linked to that is access to educational opportunities. Quality education provides essential skills, knowledge, opens doors, builds networks. Without it, many dream paths just become significantly harder, if not impossible, to access. Seeing others succeed can also provide a powerful boost. That's where role models come in.
Someone who makes the seemingly impossible feel, well, possible because you see they did it. Maybe someone who looks like you or comes from a similar background.
Right. The sources give that example of a young woman seeing a successful female entrepreneur, which suddenly makes that path feel more concrete, more attainable for her. Though, as the sources also note, social comparisons can be tricky. They can either inspire you to improve or they can make you feel inadequate, depending on your perspective.
Yeah, it depends how you frame it.
Yeah. Network accessibility is also vital. We often hear it's not just what you know, but who you know, and the sources suggest there's truth to that. Having connections can open doors to resources, advice, opportunities that just remain closed to others.
So having access to the right people matters.
And finally, geographical location is explicitly mentioned as a significant factor. Where you physically live dictates your access to specific industry hubs, certain resources, relevant opportunities, and even supportive communities for particular dreams. An artist trying to make it in a major cultural center like New York or London faces different external factors than one living in a more isolated rural area.
Absolutely. Different playing fields. So the external world, your culture, your support system or lack thereof, your peers, mentors, financial resources, education, even where you live, all this creates the landscape you're operating within. For you listening, How are these external factors interacting with your internal world? Who or what in your environment is providing support, and what challenges might your specific circumstances present?
Okay, so Chapter 4 of the source material really turns the lens onto our unique personal circumstances and life experiences. The specific journey you've already lived deeply shapes both your capacity and your approach to pursuing future dreams.
Right, this is the stuff that makes each person's path truly individual, isn't it?
Precisely. Significant life events, whether they're positive or maybe traumatic, can fundamentally alter your priorities and perspectives. Think about a major health scare or losing someone close, or even a sudden unexpected opportunity. These can either propel you towards a long-held dream or, conversely, force you to reevaluate and maybe choose a different path, focus more on stability or caregiving.
Yeah, those big moments can really string away the non-essentials and clarify what truly matters to you.
They really can. And your current age and life stage bring their own specific sets of freedoms and constraints. A recent graduate, for example, often has more flexibility and maybe a higher tolerance for risk than someone who's mid-career with a family, a mortgage, and established responsibilities.
Sure, different priorities, different pressures.
Exactly. Health issues, too, both physical and mental, are mentioned as potentially major limiting factors. They directly impact the energy and the sheer capacity you have available for pursuing something demanding like a dream. The source example of someone struggling with depression, finding it hard to engage even in activities they used to enjoy, really highlights this stark reality.
Time and energy are definitely not limitless resources, and some people have far less to work with.
And that scarcity is often shaped significantly by family responsibilities, particularly things like caregiving for children or maybe elderly parents. This can be a huge drain on both time and energy, sometimes forcing people to postpone or significantly alter their personal dreams.
Which then ties into things like time management skills and trying to find some semblance of work-life balance, right?
Exactly, because you literally have to carve out the time and the energy needed for your dream from everything else demanding your attention. The ability to prioritize, to protect that time, and to manage the demands of work and life without completely burning out. These are behaviors, yes, but they're deeply constrained or enabled by your circumstances.
Like the source mentioning someone in a super demanding corporate job just being too exhausted for hobbies or side projects.
Yeah.
The circumstance limits the energy available.
Precisely. And past experiences also leave their mark, particularly previous failures.
Oh yeah, those can leave deep scars and make you hesitant to try again.
Absolutely. They can create a strong aversion to putting yourself out there again, especially if those failures were maybe public or had significant financial consequences. However, the sources also explore the flip side. Trauma and resilience. Adverse experiences can be processed in ways that don't just build resilience, but can actually fuel new dreams, often centered around advocacy or helping others who've gone through similar things. It really depends on how the experience interacts with your internal processing, your mindset.
Kind of turning pain into purpose.
Exactly. And throughout all of this, the sources highlight self-reflection as being crucial. Taking the time to actually understand your genuine desires, your core values, your motivations. This helps clarify which dream is truly yours to pursue, rather than one you feel you should pursue.
Understanding yourself is key to choosing the right path for you.
Right. And the sources even touch upon the potential lasting impact of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, noting they can shape fundamental beliefs about self-worth and safety in the world, which in turn can impact ambition and the belief that future success is even possible.
So our personal history, the challenges we've faced, the responsibilities we currently hold, these are all weaving together constantly, shaping our capacity and maybe even our willingness to chase after our dreams. For you listening, what major events or ongoing circumstances in your life feel most significant in shaping your journey towards or perhaps away from a particular dream right now?
Okay, finally, the sources bring us to the tangible, the everyday stuff, behavioral and cognitive factors. These are the actual actions we take, the skills we use, and the thinking patterns we employ day to day as we try to move forward.
Right. This is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, the actual doing.
Exactly. And it often starts with goal clarity. Just having a vague wish like, I want to be successful, isn't usually enough. Well-defined, specific goals provide a clear target for your efforts.
Like the source contrasting an author with a detailed plan for their novel versus someone who just generally wants to be a writer. The clearer goal makes specific actions possible.
Right. You need a map, not just a vague idea of the destination. And navigating that map effectively requires good decision-making skills, evaluating options, assessing risks, making choices that are actually aligned with your goals. The example of the entrepreneur analyzing market trends before investing. That's demonstrating this crucial skill.
Makes sense.
The sources also group together practical skills like planning, breaking down those huge, overwhelming goals into smaller, manageable steps and being open to feedback and critique.
Which is vital for improvement, even if it stings sometimes.
Absolutely. Learning how to plan the ascent and being willing to actually hear how you might climb better, these are learnable behaviors. Another cognitive aspect mentioned is time perspective.
Time perspective.
Yeah, basically, do you tend to prioritize future goals over more immediate gratification? A strong future orientation helps you make those necessary sacrifices today, like skipping a night out to work on your project for a bigger reward down the line.
Ah, okay. Which kind of loops back to impulse control, but maybe from a slightly different angle. Thinking about the future value.
It does, yeah. And fundamentally, the sources emphasize just being action-oriented. Simply taking proactive steps, even really small ones, rather than getting stuck in endless analysis or hesitation. Joining a relevant club, taking one small online class, starting that tiny first draft, these are actions that build momentum.
Just starting is often the hardest part, isn't it?
It really is. Although, interestingly, the sources also discuss the less intuitive idea of a fear of success.
Fear of success, not failure.
Yeah, it's a subconscious fear, often not of failing, but of the changes that success might bring. New responsibilities, maybe different relationships, shifts in your identity. The example given is someone avoiding a promotion because they're secretly anxious about the new expectations and visibility. It's a kind of behavioral avoidance driven by a cognitive or emotional fear of success itself.
Wow, that's a fascinating barrier, almost like getting in your own way right when you're getting close.
It happens more than you might think. Now, to make consistent progress, routine and habit formation along with self-discipline are highlighted as vital.
The daily grind stuff.
Pretty much. The sources stress the importance of establishing consistent practices, maybe daily writing time, regular practice for a musician, consistent networking for an entrepreneur. These habits build the dream brick by brick through cumulative effort. The musician practicing consistently isn't just wishing, they're building skill through habit.
Right. Habits become the infrastructure that supports the big goal.
Well put. And crucially, adaptability and cognitive flexibility. Dreams rarely, if ever, unfold exactly as planned. Obstacles pop up, circumstances change. So the ability to adjust your approach, learn from unexpected challenges, and pivot your strategy when necessary is a key behavioral and cognitive skill.
Like the athlete adapting their training after an injury, or the entrepreneur having to pivot their business model because the market shifted.
Exactly. Being able to roll with the punches instead of just getting knocked out by them. The sources also mention a whole range of other factors that influence our daily behavior, and thinking everything from sensation-seeking, perhaps driving travelers to explore, to using visualization techniques before a job interview, to the importance of finding community in something like a writer's workshop, or even just scaling back a massive project like writing a whole book into smaller, more manageable parts.
Wow.
While many of these are touched on fairly briefly, they really illustrate the sheer variety of tools, tendencies, and strategies involved in the day-to-day pursuit of a dream.
It's like having a complex toolkit, and how you use it, or maybe whether you use it at all, is really key.
Exactly. It's about how all those internal beliefs and emotions and those external circumstances we talked about ultimately manifest in the concrete actions and thinking patterns you employ each day.
So from setting clear goals and planning the steps, to building consistent habits and being able to adapt when things inevitably go wrong, these are the behaviors that seem to translate aspiration into actual reality. For you listening, what are your daily actions related to your dream, if any? Do they reflect clear planning or maybe more hesitation? And how do you tend to react behaviorally when a plan hits a snag or doesn't work out?
So bringing all of this together, as the final sections of the sources really emphasize, makes one thing abundantly clear. Pursuing a dream or not pursuing it isn't about one simple factor.
Not at all. It's definitely not like flipping a switch or overcoming a single hurdle and then you're set.
No, it's a deeply dynamic and really interconnected system. Your beliefs about yourself, they impact your emotional resilience, your emotional fears, they influence whether you even take action. Your external circumstances, your finances, your support network, they provide resources or constraints that shape the kinds of actions you can realistically take and the time you even have available. And your past experiences. They create patterns of behavior and belief that you carry forward into the present.
It really is like a complex web, isn't it? You pull one thread, say, you work on building your self-efficacy,
Yeah.
and that can impact your emotional resilience, which then might make you more likely to persist. That's a behavior,
Right.
even when you face external rejection.
Precisely. Or, conversely, maybe financial constraints, that's a circumstance, limit your educational opportunities environment, which impacts the skills you can develop, behavioral cognitive, and that could potentially lower your self-efficacy belief for certain ambitious paths. Understanding these interactions as the sources lay them out is really empowering for you.
Yeah, it's not about finding excuses for why you haven't done something, but more about gaining real clarity on the specific forces, internal and external, that are actually at play in your unique life.
Exactly. It allows you to identify where your own leverage points might be areas where a small change could have a big impact, and also where the really significant barriers lie, whether they're primarily internal or external or behavioral. It helps shift the whole thing from just a vague desire to a more informed strategy for how to navigate towards it.
This has been a truly deep dive into, well, the engine of aspiration, I guess. Thanks so much for sharing the source material that allowed us to explore all these interacting layers. It's just so clear the path toward your dreams is influenced by this complex, very personal mix of internal mindsets, feelings, external circumstances, personal history, and your daily actions.
And recognizing this complexity, I think, is the first crucial step towards navigating it effectively. It's really about building self-awareness so you can identify your own patterns, the helpful ones and the unhelpful ones, and then find ways to cultivate the necessary resilience, adaptability, and those consistent behaviors needed to move forward.
It kind of transforms the pursuit from something that feels maybe mysterious or overwhelming into more of a journey of understanding and deliberate, informed effort.
Exactly.
So, for you listening, considering all these interacting factors we've discussed today, your beliefs, your emotions, the social influences around you, your personal history, and your daily actions and thoughts, which single factor, or maybe which specific interaction between two factors, feels most significant for your personal journey towards your dreams right now? Why does that particular one stand out to you today?
Yeah, thinking about that specific point of leverage or maybe that key challenge in your own life, that can be a really powerful starting point for figuring out how to move forward.
The power of awareness in the pursuit of aspirations. Definitely something to reflect on.